And good morning to you. Welcome to Sunday Edition. I'm Richard Piatt. The American dream used to set us apart from other countries. It's the idea that if you work hard enough, everyone has equal opportunity for a richer and better life. But there is evidence that shows the American dream is fading away. Financial inequality between the rich and the poor has been rising in the United States and in Utah over the past few decades. This morning, we're going to be taking a closer look at a new study released by the Utah Foundation that examines the Great Recession's impact on economic mobility. We'll talk to the authors in just a moment, but first, this preview. The nation entered into the Great Recession in December of 2007. By 2011, Utah's home ownership rate had dropped by nearly 3%.
17,000 Utah families lost their homes to foreclosure in the last year and a half.
I can tell you've been home with Grandma all day.
Curtis and Jeanette Page were one of those families.
It was devastating. And the biggest thing that was devastating was because we had 4 children.
Curtis is a school teacher, and Jeanette ran a successful online business from home. But the recession wiped out most of her clientele.
We went from having money and being able to survive to living only on my husband's income, which isn't enough.
The couple tried to save their home through a loan modification, but fell victim to a flawed system. Now, they're not sure if they'll ever be able to own another home.
At my age, our credit's ruined now, and by the time it gets better, I'm going to be 4 or 5 years from retirement.
The erosion of home ownership in Utah, while slight, indicates a weakening of one of the main tenets of the American dream.
There's been an increase in the number of people renting as opposed to owning their own homes.
Steve Kroes is president of the Utah Foundation. The group analyzed data from the Utah Tax Commission during the 1990s and compared it to the last decade. The group found the Great Recession increased the number of Utahns who are now further away from the American dream.
It means that not only was their income falling in actual real terms, but that they were falling below other people in society.
The most recent 9-year period saw a 12% increase in people who were downwardly mobile, increasing to 40% of Utah's population.
I'm thinking that the economy is improving little by little, but for us, I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever recover.
The Pages now both work 2 jobs and look forward to a time when they can actually afford to take a vacation.
Obviously, we want better for our children.
In fact, Utah has one of the smallest income differentials in the country. That is the difference between rich and poor. But it happens that if you're stuck at the bottom, that doesn't probably mean that much. The point that Utah's is smaller, that is. We want to talk more about the differences between the rich and the poor. And joining me this morning from the Utah Foundation are President Steve Kroes and analyst Sean Teagan. Thank you very much for joining me. Steve, tell me now, there's been a lot of studies done on this economic issue right now. What sets your study apart, would you say?
Well, it's a focus on Utah. And so there have been quite a few studies nationally that are looking at many decades of time and looking at children as adults now compared to their parents' generation and things like that. And this is a study specific to Utah. What's unique is we have hundreds of thousands of people in the study sample. It comes from the Tax Commission. Their economist was able to summarize the data from all of the tax returns in Utah. So it's not just people answering a phone call and saying, this is how much money I made. It's what they're actually reporting on their taxes. It's a great authoritative number, and we're showing some significant challenges.
Okay, Sean, is it easy to find out what's causing it and whether there's any hope for people to be more upwardly mobile?
I guess what is causing people to not be upwardly mobile it could be a whole host of things, but education is of course going to be a big player, because this whole idea of upward mobility is earning more income. And the data show that if you get an education, you will probably, you're increasing the chances that you'll be earning more income and making your way up that economic ladder.
Through a skilled job. We have a Facebook comment from one of our viewers that we posed the question to: has the Great Recession made it harder for you to achieve the American dream? People in that survey, or in that question, in response to that question, overwhelmingly said yes. And here's a comment from Valerie Ward, who said, "I'd like to see a topic of the American dream to people today covered. To own a home, to be debt-free, to retire, or just make it to the next payday. Is that the American dream?" she's asking. "I'm very grateful to have been impacted by the recession only in smallish ways, but have watched so many friends and family continue to struggle with no end in sight." Steve, is there end in sight?
Well, there's some end in the broad sense when you look at big averages that our economic recovery is forging ahead in Utah. We're one of the better states in terms of lower unemployment and rising job counts. But for individuals, they get lost in the sea of numbers. And like your example showed of that family, there are many people who one of them lost a job, or they both lost a job, they've lost a home, it's impacted their credit. That will be on their credit report for years to come. People who maybe lost some of their retirement funds and haven't seen a recovery of their ability to retire, and they're going to have to work longer, or people who've been laid off in their 50s and can't convince someone to hire them at this stage in life. So a lot of these impacts are going to linger, even if the broad averages are moving up pretty well for Utah right now.
Okay, let's talk about this issue of mobility, Sean, because that's basically getting at the notion that it's increasingly difficult for people to rise up the economic ladder. In the period of 1994 to 2003, according to the Utah Tax Commission, 28% of people considered themselves downwardly mobile, in other words, spiraling down. In 2003 to 2011, 39% of those people said so. So a growing number of people are losing ground, they feel. This is a real thing to a lot of people.
Yeah, and these are actually real numbers. I mean, this is looking at tax commission filings. So when you file your tax return, and it's adjusted for family size and whatnot, but that is it's a huge impact, and that's particularly a big impact if you're already stuck in maybe those bottom kind of tiers of that ladder, the bottom steps of that ladder. If you're down in the bottom 20% of income earners, and you're only making $10,000 a year, a decrease in just $2,000 to $3,000 may not seem like a lot to maybe somebody earning $70,000 a year, but to them, it's another huge chunk of their income.
Right, something that you have to do without some things. It's painful for a lot of people. This next Facebook comment kind of illustrates how painful it is for a lot of people. From a gentleman named Temple Hardy, or a woman named Temple Hardy. She says, "My husband was laid off 2 years ago and still hasn't found full-time employment. He has a master's degree and it seems to be working against him. No one wants to pay what he's worth, or they're worried that he'll leave as soon as he finds something better." Why is it so hard for people to climb the income ladder right now, Steve?
It's a difficult economy. I mean, this Great Recession is only comparable to the Great Depression, and we've all heard our grandparents talk about how severe the impacts were from the Great Depression. This was a huge event for America, and like you mentioned earlier, even if it didn't affect me or my family, we all know someone in our extended family who's been affected by this, and or friends that have been affected by this, and many of our own families have been affected by it. So there's just been so much unemployment, and employment is changing right now. So, for example, Sean mentioned education as a way to get ahead and climb the economic ladder.
To get a skill,
right,
so that you can get a better job.
And back in 6, 7, 8 years ago, you could get a great job in construction because Utah was growing so fast, and that was a great opportunity for those people who hadn't had a college degree or something to make some good money. And now, even though our jobs are growing, they're not growing much in construction. It's starting to turn around, but it's nothing like it was in 05, 06, 07. And so the chance to get ahead if you don't have a college degree is much harder right now than it was just 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Sean, a lot of people feel the deck is stacked against them. Policy-wide, different policies that have come into effect over the last 20 years, for example, the way that businesses are structured now. Do you get that some people feel that the deck is stacked against them as far as moving ahead?
You know, I think that is completely rational kind of feeling, especially if you are kind of stuck in the bottom. But there are some great things about living in Utah, and one of those is that we have less income inequality here than most of the rest of the nation. We have higher home ownership rates than most of the rest of the nation, and there's this recent report from Harvard and University of California shows also that when you're looking at income mobility across states, we also have better mobility than a lot of places.
Okay, we're going to take a break right now. Hopefully we'll get to this home ownership issue in just a minute when we come back, but we're going to switch out Sean for another guest. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion and take a closer look at the impact the Great Recession has had on children in particular. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. This morning, we've been taking a closer look at the impact the Great Recession has had on the American dream and why it's harder for many people to reach, especially families. This topic stirred a lot of discussion on our Facebook page recently. Casey Stanford wrote that, of course, it's made it harder, but it certainly hasn't made it impossible. I saw a quote the other day that read, especially in today's economy, it's not your fault if you get knocked down, but it's certainly your fault if you don't get back up. Joining me now is Tracy Gruber from Voices for Utah Children, joining the president of the Utah Foundation, Steve Kroes. Tracy, are you finding that the Great Recession has had a disproportionate impact on families and their children and their ability to get the kind of education that could bring them out of this situation?
Well, yes, I think there's definitely some negative impacts, significant negative impacts on kids and their ability to have access to opportunity because of the recession. We know that, as Sean said, that you need to have access to quality education, and that's true for their parents as well. And we know that when parents are doing better, the kids are going to do better too. And we have been seeing significant rises in poverty amongst kids, and that will have long-term effects on Utah's economy.
Now, Steve, I want to combine a couple of issues because we were talking about the stickiness of this issue. In other words, people that are on the lower income spectrum find it harder to climb up, combined with the issue of fewer people being able to afford homes at the same time because of this situation. So I guess my question is, combining those issues, does the environment that this kind of cultivates for kids create some issues for children in particular, do you think?
Well, sure, it does. I mean, if you look at the national studies about adult children compared to their parents' income levels 30 years ago, 40% of those who started out in the lowest 20% are still there. So intergenerational, the adult children are still where their parents were in terms of the lowest 20% of the economy. And so if you're born into a family that has limited resources, you're quite likely to stay there. And the idea of home ownership, we all want home ownership for as many people as possible. When you get families into neighborhoods where they own homes, it's a better environment for children. It's often a better environment in the schools. And you have safer neighborhoods where people keep the homes up. And it's a chance for families to build some wealth. And that's one of the things that's really missing, is the opportunity for building wealth when you're at the lower end of the income spectrum.
And that's right. There's a graphic that shows home ownership actually declining. And Utah isn't as bad as some areas of the nation are. As a matter of fact, you can see that comparing home ownership in the United States to Utah, we still have more people owning homes, but fewer of them now are owning homes.
There's been a slight dip since the recession hit, and it's still around 70%.
And is that because people just they are choosing their battles, and home ownership or affording a down payment perhaps isn't in the cards for them?
Well, I think for younger people moving into the age where they would own a home, that's happening, and they're not able to save up the money or to qualify for the loan. But a lot of people have lost homes. And so if you're a two-income family and one of you lost your job, the home, you tried to hold on to the home for as long as you could. And when you say choosing your battles, I think for most people the battle is the home. They try to keep the home at the cost of everything else and then lose it at the last minute when there's no other solution.
So are these kinds of, you've studied intergenerational poverty in
Yes.
Utah. Tracy, is this one of the biggest roadblocks for kids, or what is it?
Well, just going back to the issue of housing, I mean, having a stable home is something that I think we all can agree on is critically important for kids. And when they don't have a stable home, they're not connected to their schools, and they're on this path of not being able to emerge and move up that income ladder that we're talking about. We are seeing this in certain areas at the lower level, people staying stuck. One generation, two generations, now we're looking at third generation of poverty here in Utah, and people are just not able to emerge when they're stuck in that kind of situation for a variety of factors.
So this Facebook comment that I just read saying that it's not impossible, you can get knocked down, that's not your fault, but it's not your fault if you don't get back up. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that statement?
I think that there is a possibility in both ends. For some people, you can very easily, if you've got the skills, the gentleman who you referred to with the master's degree, if you've got the skills, when the economy recovers, they're going to have the ability to get back up. But we know for a big part of the population, it's extremely difficult. And of course, being concerned about children and their lack of opportunity, for those kids in the future, it's going to be much harder for them growing up in high poverty neighborhoods to be able to get back up.
You know, we used to be a state where, sort of like Lake Wobegon, all the children are above average. You know, we had great test scores and all of that. And we've been showing in other reports that you and I have talked about the decline in Utah test scores. We're becoming a state that's a lot more divided. And we have more poverty than we used to, even though we're a fairly low poverty state. And we've got neighborhoods, communities where the schools are a challenge for kids. They're going to schools that are riddled with poverty, that are having difficulty attracting the quality teachers who would rather teach in the more well-to-do schools, and that's making it harder for someone to pull themselves up. It's making it harder for a child to start succeeding in school in a way that will qualify them for further education to improve their economic prospects.
Okay, so Tracy, someone else's child is having a hard time, some other family down the street's having a hard time. My kids aren't having a hard time. Why should I care about that family down the street that's having a hard time? What's the...
I think there's two probably significant reasons. One is that for Utah and our values, we are not just every person for themselves. We are a community, and we strive for everybody in the community and all children to have access to opportunity. The other thing is that it impacts our economy. If you have a divided income scale and people are at separate ends and people can't get up and cannot be contributing members to our economy, that's a problem. 16% of Utah children are living in poverty right now. If we can't figure out a way, and I think that we can, to address their needs, that's 16% of our population that's not going to be able to be contributing members to our economy.
And of course, I was playing devil's advocate there. Of course, I care about the kids down the street. I don't want to say that. But Steve, you know, when we talk about this downward mobility that seems to occur, if a child is in a family where that's happening, does that also tend to affect their own mindset, maybe perhaps even their own motivation, their willingness to learn, and affecting their future down the road?
Well, it certainly could. In terms of willingness to learn, I don't know, but opportunities for learning are certainly limited when they have to be sent to a school that doesn't have all of the advanced classes or the high-quality teachers that some school in a richer neighborhood has. It does affect their outlook on the prospects, on how hard they might try for higher education and things, because they might not feel that it's attainable to them. They might feel that they can't possibly afford college. So how, you know, why try in high school if there's no way that I can get to college?
Right. Is there something legislatively that we can do to assist in pulling the kids out of this situation?
I think the good news is that we live in a state that really our problems are not so huge that policies can't address some of these issues. And I think some of the significant ones are prioritizing early childhood education. We know disparities for kids start showing up as early as 3, when their vocabularies are more limited than our upper class and middle class peers. If we start putting money towards early childhood education and offering that for at-risk kids, we know from research that closes that opportunity gap and can make things better for them.
Okay, and this brings us to Steve's favorite topic, and that is education funding, but I'm afraid we're going to have to save that for another day, Steve. We'll do an entire show on that. Thank you very much for joining me today. Steve Kroes from the Utah Foundation and Tracy Gruber from Voices for Utah.